Okay, so this is post-recording. I hope I'm in frame. So I just got done with the whiskey sour. Very familiar with it. I left my lights on. Oh, it's really good. But I left my recording going because I have several things to cover with you. As part of the job of being a bard, it is my job to storytell. And so I actually, since I have been 14, it's been a while. I have over a decade of experience, and so a lot of people come to me or ask commonly how to GM or how to run a tabletop game like DnD, Dungeons and Dragons. So a lot of people attend panels that I host and ask really simple questions. So I figured I'd throw this out there for anyone who really needs to, get the general quick questions off their chest. If you guys have more of them, as a bard, more than willing to help you with storytelling. But until that point, the first thing you want to know when GMing a game for the first time is usually, what do I need to know? Or are people going to like it? What do I have to prepare? What work is it in it for me? And so my answer is slow your roll. No one else who's new knows what's going on. Anyone with experience who's playing with a new person who's never played before, let alone never GM'd, they're going to basically look at you and say, we're at this table because we know you and we love you, and we understand you're new. We're here to have fun. So, the biggest thing you really have to worry about is just try to prepare something. It doesn't have to be a lot. It can be something as simple as, you're adventurers. Let's go adventure into the crypt over yonder this old lady in town told us about. And it's full of zombies and skeletons and they're just pouring out and we gotta find out why. It could be super simple and off the cuff like that. The easiest way to get better at it, is to go to improv classes or stage stuff, or more specifically, just make shit up. Practice your imagination. Read a lot of things. Because if you look at all of the really old books, or all of, I think 5th Ed and the new books actually say it in Dungeons and Dragons, they have a recommended read list. And then they have the Gary Gygax read list. And it's 100 books or so, and it's all crazy different mythology, it's crazy different storyline and authors and different ways of telling things. And so the biggest thing you actually have to worry about is whether you're listening to your players. Listen to your players. The biggest problem I see with new GMs, and I play with a lot of people, I've taught a lot of groups how to play D&D because I kept moving when I was in high school and then college and then after college again. And so before I was 20, I'd moved several times, and every single time I'm like, I love D&D, so we're gonna play it. And so I would basically infect whatever new groups they were always emphatic about playing, so to give them credit. They always wanted to know how to play, and the best thing about that was they were excited, and their excitement breeds forgiveness because they just want to enjoy it. So some people will be like, oh yeah, it's like a power fantasy, and so they want to level up and feel powerful. Well, you could have your giant orc over here be like, oh, I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna smash you within an inch of your life. And then you retaliate and kill him. Okay, cool battle. It took about 2 seconds. It's not very epic. I wouldn't write a movie about it. Or you could have this guy over here who's really low level, and he comes up against this thug who's been eyeing him and like being really suspicious in town and giving people problems, and be like, hey, you suck. And then the guy gets mad because he's got no emotional intelligence, and he tries to punch you. It's like, okay. He fumbles or rolls low, and like you go through this battle of like hit and miss, dodge. Oh, I run around the corner because he's obviously bigger than I am. I'm a new character. And like you do this whole crazy thing where you jump through the bar and like people start like rallying because they're like, we know this kid. What are you trying to do to him? And so the town like gets up and like fights with you. And it's like you could do all these crazy things. It's literally all in how you storytell. This is why I don't call myself a dungeon master, despite over a decade of experience. This is why I call myself a storyteller. Because I want to tell a story, and they want to interact with a world. If they wanted to just go and beat shit up, and then level up and do cool things like that, they'd play a video game. When you have people write characters, I know this is a little bit much for new GMs, so this will be intermediate and advanced. What you want to do is ask them the story of their character. Because if they can tell you, yes, Joffrey, he used to be a butler, and then his great noble family that he was born into servitude towards, they fell, and he had nothing but a great castle to dust. And so he left, because with no patronage there is no coin, and with no coin there is no bread. And therefore, Joffrey went out into the world and found his way. He started as a rogue because he had no means of legally acquiring food, and he learned the opposite of his noble and humble upbringing as the great noble's bard. As the great noble's butler. And so, made that up on the cuff. I should probably use that at some point. But, like, you want to make sure there's a story there if it's going to be a longer game. If it's a one-shot and you're just running a new game, let them go ham. The most important thing is don't get married to your plot. The things you need to prepare are nothing. Counterintuitive, I know. Just grab a drink here. Good, a little tart. So, the best takeaway I can give you is your friends are there to have fun. If they're experienced at role-playing, you should have that as a comfort, not a concern. Because if you're concerned about your friends judging you and treating you like shit and getting on you for not knowing something that obviously it's the first time you're doing, they're not good people and you should kick their ass out of your life. I'm just gonna be straight with you guys, because if you're playing with a group, they should love you. Like, they should be a community. That's what I build every day in my life. And if people aren't going to treat my friends well and aren't going to treat me well, then they don't deserve to be in my life. Like, you can't try to be a people pleaser for people that don't love you and don't love your friends and don't want to be a part of what you're doing. If they really are that unhappy in life, they will naturally ostracize themselves and filter themselves out of your life as long as you stick to your core values. So, this took a turn. It's been a good night. But yeah, the most common question I get is, what do I need to prepare? You don't have to prepare anything unless that's what you rely on. Play to your strengths, work on your weaknesses. I'd say the biggest thing, which a lot of GMs don't know is your weaknesses and your faults and your flaws and your like negative traits will come out tenfold when you GM. So if you're, I'm trying to think of an example for me. If you're controlling or socially above people, because my social skills are a little more adept than Fighter McFighter. Great guy, love him to death. He can't lie to save his soul. but with that in mind, I could run a noble in a game that just rolls him completely. That's not the game he's there for. He might be there for some intrigue, he might be there for some, like, being a general and, like, motivating the army and, like, being that spearhead for courage to blossom in the world. But he's, like, I need to understand as a GM that because I'm good at social and because I have the strength to guide people in the correct direction, that I need to manage that and not let it become a problem of railroading. One of the biggest things you can do to piss people off in your game is railroad. If you have a plot that you're married to and you can't rewrite it, erase it, like just kill it, dead in the spot. I've had games where I had 3 players and it was a super involved, plot-heavy, dark game. If you died, you left the apartment immediately. Like, your character's dead, you pack your shit and go. And so it brought this, like, really heavy mortality and, like, need to survive to the characters and the players. And they actually felt that problem of death, and, like, they worried about dying, because they really wanted to know the plot. But know your strengths. And so if you are the kind of person who can write dark stuff, write dark stuff. If you can write light stuff, write light stuff. If you write Fae, or if you know Arthurian legend, or if you know My Little Pony, write it. It doesn't matter what you write. If you know that lore, write for what you want to write. But don't be married to the exact events. Be married to the world. If you create this world, my masterpiece, as I told you, was Dark Sun. The Dark Sun campaign was the darkness tried to consume the light. You could light a torch at night, and the darkness would claw at the light almost. There'd be this, like, flickering darkness impeding and clawing at the light. Every single light source. And so if you were outside of town at night, you were pretty much written off because you're just dead. Like, the monsters would come. They were all kinds of horrors. It was a very dark, very horror game. It was so much fun. I love dark and horror, so that's kind of my jam. But write to your strengths. If you study one thing, do it. If you study Fey Magic, do it. If you study Cthulhu, do it. Just keep in mind, your players may or may not prescribe to that. You want to tell them ahead of time what to expect. And if you let them go ham with character creation before you have a list of things to approve or disapprove of, you're gonna be in for a bucket of disappointment. Because one thing I've seen a lot is players will be like, oh, I'm making this character and I have these great grandiose ideas. I'm gonna be like the general of an army who's been kicked out because, for example, Julius Caesar was like, no, like, you pissed me off because you have too much power, and so I'm going to denounce you and you will not be a general anymore. And it's like, you have this huge background. But then the GM tells you you're level 1 starting adventurers. It doesn't work. And so, as a GM, tell them their level, tell them about what they should expect for storytelling, but if your heroes are going to be massively strong, find a way to storytell that by writing the scene for them. If you want to convey something, do it with a narrative. Because the last thing you want to do is say, hey, that city guard over there, he's level 10 and he's got about 50 hit points. If you mess with him, he's just gonna slash and kill you because he's got a magical +5 sword. Doesn't really make sense. If you say, that's Offenir, legendary city guard captain. Like, he's been known to slay 1,000 elves in a single battle. And then it's like, you kind of get the picture. And then they have a presence about them. So what you want to do is you want to focus on that kind of thing. So if you focus on the narrative versus the numbers, you're going to come across a lot stronger as a GM. Like, that's the quickest cheat button I've got. Don't ever give somebody, if you can help it. If you do, it's perfectly fine. Don't give people like a +1 flaming longsword. That's like my classic joke. I hate the +5 or the +1 flaming longsword. Because it's like, you could literally have Firebrand. And you just call it Firebrand, and it's a longsword that's on fire whenever you swing it or strike something villainous. It's like, it does the same thing even if you strike someone neutral or good. It's still on fire. But it like brings a character to it. You write a narrative to it. Gosh. Pardon me. So, that's my basic about that. If I've got to add one more thing, it's don't want to write too much. Like, I absolutely love, just to disclaimer this, I love when people have so much written that you can like feel it. Like, it's palpable how thick and diverse the world is. You can also do the same thing by hinting at things. Like, that's the gunsmith over there. You don't have time to see Grognir, but he's a dwarf who invented guns. Maybe next time you're in town, you'll have time to see him. And the carrier, or the carriage who's carrying you, would say that just in bypassing that small shop. And be like, okay, this world has history and depth, and it's like, maybe later I could ask for a tour of that main bazaar that you traveled through. It's like, you want to hint at things, but you don't want to write a billion scenarios and a billion NPCs that'll never get used. Because all that needs to happen is, Thormak the orc decided to slash at the noble because he thought he was being disagreeable. And so now you have animosity throughout the kingdom and you're not welcome in the capital city. You just wrote off the entire capital city because players are never going to do what you predict. Ever. Ever. And so, you want to focus on condensing it down. And if you condense it down to what's your main antagonist, maybe what's his family, but like, what's his main antagonist and what is his deal? Because if you can find out the main antagonists or NPCs for each of the conflicts or each of the scenarios or things you're trying to represent, they will have their own motivations once you start writing them. So, easy example, I'm just going to make these up off the cuff. Elven Kingdom, you have Eleanor. If you ever want elves to use a lot of E's and A's, and a bit of L and R. That's all I need. So, Eleanor, the great Elven King, he's been there for 800 years. He's now known as Eleanor the Grey out of respect, not for loss of his blonde nature. So, Eleanor, he of course wants to protect his people. He used to be haughty, he used to be a little more hot-blooded and like the women, but he's curbed his nature towards keeping his people alive ever since his father has passed. And so, like, you get this feeling of Eleanor, and you can, granted Eleanor, quaff the raven. Anyways, Eleanor is this like really protective, like you'd almost imagine like warm, and you could like just go off the cuff. Let's say a fighter, a cleric, and a mage walk into a room with Eleanor. He's like, what ho! Like, I have not seen adventurers in my land in a few decades. What brings you around? Not a few decades. I thought we sent a searching party a few years ago. And it's like from that alone, like, you get the nature of the elves, like, longevity. And so, like, for another example, one of my favorites is you have this, like, dark brooding character, and he is, like, out to correct crime, and, like, most people will, out of nature, don't blame them, create a brooding character who's an orphan who doesn't have to worry about his background or his family. Very common, very rogue, very ranger, very common. But they'll create the person who's got no family, they're out for vengeance or darkness or angst, and they just want to have that kind of adventure because they don't know that they're allowed to roleplay yet. So this might be a little much, but it's your job to let them know they can roleplay. So what I do to people like that is usually something along the lines of repercussions, and then giving them agency in what they do. If I give them repercussions, they might be like, oh, I'm gonna be this scary dark Batman character, and just scare the orphan who's trying to give us shit to intimidate him. It's like, I roll intimidate. Aha, I win because I'm a heroic character against a child. It's really more bullying, to be honest, but it happens pretty frequently. But, like, you have all this building to do, and so later on, you want those little interactions to actually come back. So what I highly recommend for your first couple sessions, if it's going to be a campaign, write down all the weird interactions. So, oh, he interacted with this orphan. He scared the crap out of him. Later on, have these other kids that he might have played with in Lowtown, or Hightown, who knows? Maybe his father knows because he's a noble kid. It depends on what you painted the scene as. But you have that come back as, oh, he's the scary guy. He's the Batman. Or he's the terror of the night. I'm a little bit stuck on Batman and Joker right now. But, like, give him some adjectives and be like, that is the terror man or the boogeyman, or, like, create some tiny lore about the character to give them, like, a sense of weight to their actions. Because if you don't weight their actions and teach them that the game has repercussions early, you're just letting them run wild, and they're gonna go do crazy stuff all the time. And so you're gonna have this game that's just off the rails and you can't really write for it, you kind of just have to improv. Whereas if you right off the bat have this noble be a dick to these guys, and be like, oh, yes, Poppers, get out of my way. And it's like these adventurers who have like thousands of gold, and it's like, I could hire you if I wanted to, but you're not worth the gold. And it's like, just be a dick to the players. The only reason you want to be a dick to the players is if you want to create a hateable villain. So the purpose of villains is to be hated or confusedly loved. I'm not going to go into that tangent right now. Focus on the easy button of hating villains and then loving allies. Because really easy button. Make the villains someone they want to hate. Because if they love hating them, then they're going to hate them emphatically. If it's like, oh yes, John grew up an orphan and he's got this like troubled background and he's really this understandable guy, like I can see why he's tortured, but now he's moved on to, like, I can't even think of a good example, but if it's a villain that's understandable, then they're going to sympathize with him and it's not going to be fun to beat him up or hate him. If you're going for a really long game, that'll work if they hated him in the first couple arcs. Like, first arc or two, usually. And then it's like, maybe a hint of they're okay, and then make them unredeemable. Unless they die, or get beaten up, or whatever magical artifact you destroy releases their soul to themselves. Like, you want to make sure that when you have it as a villain, they love hating him, because they should get excited about the douchebaggery that you put upon them. If not, you're not storytelling as well as you could. It's like, that's high-level GM speaking to medium GMs. If you're brand new, don't worry about it. Anything you do will make them happy, because they just want to play. And as someone who's GM'd a lot, I just want to play. Because a lot of times the people who GM, they will intimidate the crap out of new people. Because I've had plenty of friends who are new and then hadn't GM'd before, because that was their first time playing D&D at all. And they're literally ostracizing me because I've played for 5, 10, 15 years. They won't invite me to the table. I'd rather play in a crappy game than be not invited to my friends' events. So, don't ever be afraid to invite your friends to a game, and just realize that we're happy you're playing the game, because this is us showing you a very special thing to us, and so there's nothing you can do wrong. As long as you're trying and you are excited, we'll be happy to be a part of it. Railroading is only a problem because people are there to play the game. If you suddenly say, oh, your character suddenly loses control and they start attacking your allies, it's like, if you gave them agency, maybe. Don't worry about that if you're new. What you don't want to do is make them sit through a cutscene. Don't make them do certain things. Don't control the characters. If you're new, just let them run free and try to wing it as best you can, because they're gonna do weird shit. Like, that is the rule of D&D. If you can think of it, it'll happen. Because players will just go off the rails if you don't guide them properly. But this isn't a video game. You don't have hard code to tell people to do this or that. It's not a movie where they have no agency. They came to the table to do what they want to do. The only way you can railroad without making them feel useless or helpless or like crap, the only way you can railroad is by leading them there. A fun example from my favorite campaign I ran, Dark Sun, was this warrior woman, this drunkard warrior woman who was on her path to redemption, had just came back from this great adventure. She came back, and Leo, her little brother, who she'd been taking care of and has been looking up to her as this role model, Leo had been drafted to the Hell Knights at the age of 10. And the Hell Knights, it's 50-50 shot they survive if you're 15 to 20 adulthood. And so basically, he was drafted into the Hell Knights by the villainous noble who was the antagonist. And so he knew what he was doing. The kid was gonna die. It was like a death sentence. And took the PC sibling. From that, there's really not a lot of choice. So you're absolutely guiding them, but it is an option. You never tell the players to do the thing. You basically make them want to. If you can do that, you'll be a great GM. If you're new, don't worry about it. Give them a weird dungeon, have no reason why things are in it, and trust me, I'll want to run into your game. So, let people who are experienced be your players, because it often ends up where the GMs are just GMs forever. People are too afraid because we have experience to let us be players. It's we want to play in games, even if they're crappy. We just want to play in games instead of running them for once. It's like asking someone to be on the ball 24/7. It's like, no, let us relax. It's like at least appreciate your friends enough to let them play in your games instead of just playing in theirs. Just pay it forward. I should do a sign off. I don't have a sign off.